the farmers who pay for those contracts pay for the cost of that million acre feet every year, regardless of whether they get it.
The voice you just heard is Lois Henry of sjvwater.org. So if you're a local resident of Kern County, you probably recognize the name Lois Henry from all the years, about 30 years of investigative reporting she did for the Bakersfield Californian. In 2017, she left the newspaper, went out on her own, and formed a nonprofit website called sjvwater.org, which provides some real in-depth investigative reporting on all the water issues, both locally and up and down the state of California, all the things that are going on with SGMA and various fights and arguments and negotiations over all of the water issues that are affecting our state. So let me set the stage for you a little bit. The Kern County Farm Bureau reports that there's about 170,000 jobs locally here in Kern County that are related to the ag industry. The Bakersfield Californian reported just this week that the Kern County ag industry produced about $8 billion of revenue last year. So it's an $8 billion industry here locally. And Kern County and the San Joaquin Valley, just the southern San Joaquin Valley, will rival just about anywhere in the world as a top ag producer. So the entire world relies on the agriculture industry that comes from our area. In addition to that, our metro Bakersfield population here in the southern San Joaquin Valley and in Kern County is about 800,000. And what's needed for all of this to work, the agriculture, the large population we have, large and growing population, is water. That's the lifeblood that keeps all of this going. And as we know, it doesn't rain a lot here in the valley. We require that it rain up in the Sierra Nevadas, that it snows up in the Sierra Nevadas, and that snowpack melts, comes down out of the Sierra Nevadas into the reservoirs that we've constructed over the last 100 years, the canal pipeline systems, the waterways that we've developed in order to bring it down to the areas that need it, mostly for this large population that's here and the large ag industry that we have here. And without that, it doesn't work. Well, who owns that water and who has rights to that water? And those should be pretty straightforward questions, but over the last 150 years, there's been a lot of changes, and the answer to those questions is not always very straightforward. And especially now, we're at a pivotal time where there's a lot going on with water in California in general, and specifically and importantly here in our own backyard, here in the Kern County area and the southern San Joaquin Valley. So in today's show, Lois and I we lay out a pretty good history of where we've been and what's brought us to our current state that we're in now. And Lois does a great job of updating us on all the things we should be watching for, everything from things that are going on outside of our county, in the Los Angeles area, in Sacramento, and the decisions that are being made in those areas that might affect us locally. And then even more importantly, what is going on locally and who are the various entities that are involved in the negotiations over water rights, over water ownership, and water usage. So stay tuned for a very in-depth, in-the-weeds show about California water.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome to the show today. My name is Scott Hanson. Before we get started on today's episode, please check us out on Instagram and subscribe to our podcast on whatever podcast player you're using. That really helps out the show. We really appreciate it. Lois Henry, thank you very much for coming in today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I've been reading your articles in the Bakersfield Californian for years, specifically on water. That seems to have been a pet project of yours now for a very long time, but it seems like even more lately, that is what you focus on 100% of the time.
Well, I worked at the Bakersfield Californian for, from May 22nd, 1990 until August 7th, 2017. So when I was writing for the Californian, I wrote about a bunch of different topics. And I tried to focus as much as possible on water, although my bosses thought water was boring.
Hard to believe.
I had one boss mark me down on my evaluation for writing too much about water during the worst part of the last drought, which was the worst drought in 12,000 years. Whatevs.
Yeah, anyways, not too important. It seems like, water's now the gold of California, right?
Well, we are
Could be.
Smack in the middle of farming country, and you can't farm produce without water. But anyway, That editor is no longer there. Anyway, so I left in 2017. I no longer work for the Bakersfield Californian, but I had this idea for this website focusing on water. Actually, it was a larger idea, but I wanted to focus on water to start with since 2004. And I was going to actually try, I pitched it to my bosses at the Bakersfield Californian as sort of a spin-off, and we could get really in depth and, you know, scrape it for the mothership for the regular paper, but we could have subscribers and might be an extra revenue stream, et cetera, et cetera. I had a whole business plan worked out, and they told me that they were not interested. And so I just sort of kept the idea in the back of my head. And when I left in 2017, I started my own website called SJV Water because I'm not a creative person. I write about water in the San Joaquin Valley.
I think it looks fantastic. I've checked it out, and I mean, there's a ton of information. It's a great source. I don't think there's a source anything like it, really. You're covering everything that's going on in the San Joaquin Valley. sjvwater.org is the website for people to check it out. You have a YouTube channel where you're doing some YouTube information. So that's also really great content.
I'm an old dog learning a lot of new tricks. I like
it. I like it. Like I said, I don't think there's such a specialized source on San Joaquin Valley water, and then specifically here in our area, the southern San Joaquin Valley, Bakersfield, and in this area. Maybe we can kind of set the tone and paint a little bit of a picture of the history of things that have kind of led to right now. Like I know that we still have this old contract from I think 1888 or something that like a lot of things are still based on with the Kern River, but even broader than that, there's the San Joaquin River that's north of Fresno, right, that kind of flows up and north, right, that's kind of out of our immediate southern San Joaquin Valley area. But then there's 4 rivers, as I understand, below the San Joaquin that all kind of flow into this basin that is probably from Bakersfield to Visalia, Hanford area, right? So you got what are the Kings?
Well, the hydrologic region that we are in is the Tulare hydrologic region. And that does include the San Joaquin River, because when the San Joaquin River used to be able to sort of flow naturally, it would have floods that would end up in the Tulare Lake. That's why we're the Tulare hydrologic region.
Okay.
Because the Tulare Lake, which conveniently is in Kings County, not in Tulare County, just to make it more confusing.
Yeah, let's confuse everyone.
So the Tulare Lake was historically the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi, and it was in right there in Kings County. And all of these rivers, the Kern River when it flowed big, then if you go north from us, you've got the Kaweah, the Tule, and the Kings, the Big Kahuna in that area, and also the San Joaquin. When they flowed really big and we had the really big water years and we didn't have any other diversions, it flowed into the Tulare Lake bed, which is, I'm not going to remember how many miles big it is, but it was like...
I looked up something like 700 square miles of a body of water in this valley. I mean, imagine that. That's just wild. And that was about 120 years ago. I think around the turn of the century in the 1900.
They started draining it in different iterations and levels of success, I think starting in like 1870.
Okay.
And then by the turn of the century and into the 20s, because that's when Boswell started farming the lake bed up there. The J.G. Boswell Company started farming the lake bed, and he actually arrived there in 1924 and started planting cotton. And that was sort of basically the end of the Tulare Lake, except in high flow years. And then, of course, then we got all the dams. We got the Pine Flat Dam on the Kings River and the Schaefer Dam on the Tule River, the Terminus Dam on the Kaweah River, Lake Isabella here. And that all started in the 1930s through the 50s.
That was like Reclamation Act, right? That was...
No, it's half and half.
Okay.
Some of it is Army Corps of Engineers and some of it is reclamation. Then that becomes an interesting thing and gets into the weeds of how much water can be used on how much land.
Okay.
The Army Corps of Engineers doesn't care. The Army Corps of Engineers is all about flooding. And so if you have a 10,000 acre farm or if you have a 100 acre farm, they don't care if this water is going down to you. Their primary focus is flood control. So, their name is Bennett and they ain't in it. For who uses it and how,
right.
Below the dam. The Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm trying to remember if the Bureau of Reclamation, the Bureau of Reclamation, I think, built the Friant Dam. But there was a big argument over who should build the Pine Flat Dam. Army Corps was going to be, I think, more expensive. Bureau of Reclamation was going to be cheaper. But the Bureau of Reclamation, when it built dams back in the 30s, would say, okay, well, we're going to build this dam and contain this water. And then we're only going to really want to use it for farms that are, I think it was 360 acres, because they wanted this yeoman farming, homesteading, da-da-da-da. Well, the Kings River Pine Flat Dam feeds the Boswell farming empire,
I
which
see.
is a bit more than 360 acres.
And I understand that there was a little political
Yes,
maneuvering
there
that
was-
got that grandfathered in. And also the Reclamation Act was a lot about power generation, right? Or maybe both of them were back when they were.
Some of it was.
Okay.
Well, and so the Army Corps of Engineers ended up building the Pine Flat Dam, and Boswell doesn't have to accede to the 360 acre farm.
So that's
limitation.
how it ended up being under that
Right.
umbrella. I see. So where did this 600 square mile lake go? I mean, is that just from moving it into canals and irrigation
Yeah.
for
It's
agricultural use?
It's all parsed out now. You know, Boswell gets a little bit, and Vidovich gets a little bit, well, a lot of it. And all the different, farming entities get a little bit. And, I mean, we still have the water, like I told you earlier. It's just when you're going to get that water when you order your almond soy latte, almond milk latte at Starbucks, because it goes into almonds and it goes into pistachios and it goes into cotton. And
see.
we still have that water. It's still here. It's in a different form.
So drought, obviously a huge topic.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, you've never heard of this drought concept, right? It's like a never-ending drought. I mean, we've had bouts of drought over, probably many hundreds of years, but this latest one seems brutal and it seems never ending and no end in sight. Is it related to the fact that there used to be marshland and lake bed and runoff and things like that accumulated here in the valley and no longer is here? Does that contribute to that?
You mean just the fact that we're drying out?
Yeah, there's just less water on the ground to evaporate and be rained back out, snowed out in the Sierra Nevada. Is that related? Is there any correlation between those two?
The scientists are all talking about the fact that our climate is changing. And the way that we're seeing it change in California that's of great concern is that it used to be, and our entire water system is predicated on this phenomenon, is that in the wintertime we get snow and ice up in the upper reaches of the Sierra Nevadas, and then in the spring it dribbles out and we contain it in all of these different reservoirs, Pine Flat, Isabella, etc. And then those reservoirs then dribble it down to farmers or cities, etc. And so that's how we have operated for like 100 and some years. But 100 and some years in California, we think we know something about the climate and how things operate, and that's not even a drip in geologic time. So we've been pretty arrogant in how we think of things. We think of, this is normal, or that's, 100% of normal, or 50% off normal, or what. We have no clue. Now scientists are starting to look back at tree rings and, going back 12,000, 15,000 years, and they're saying, well, we may have been, when we populated the West, American settlers, we may have been in a fairly lush time. So we may not be in a, quote, drought. We may just be experiencing things as they kind of normally are. And they cycle up in water and then they cycle down, and they do that over, 100 years. And so we think, this is normal. No. Maybe we don't know what normal is. And then you add climate change to it, and climate change, they're saying we're not going to get less precipitation necessarily, but it's not going to come in the nice, neat snow in the winter. And then, the package that I described, it's going to come in these wild deluges, some, way wetter than others. And do we have the capability to capture that water when it comes? And I think we've demonstrated that we don't have that capability, because in 2017, when we had all those, which was the biggest water year on record in California, and remember, our records only really go back 150 years, so it's not maybe saying much. But anyway, a lot of that water was just flushed out to the ocean because we didn't have and some people will argue, well, we have all these environmental regulations that required that. But in point of fact, we don't have the capability, the physical capability of holding on to that much water all at once. We have the capability of, like I said, a little bit here, a little bit there, then it melts, then we move it.
So you drive up and down the I-5 freeway and you see the signs that say, like, ship the water down south. Is the water from the Delta area and those rivers that are up in the Sacramento area, is that water rightfully flow south? Like, historically, does that water belong south, or is it just send us the water because we could sure use it down here?
No. No, it never naturally flowed south. It always...
I think that's a misconception. I mean, I think people...
Yeah, well, except, there's nature, and then there's contracts.
Sure. Yeah.
So when you talk about history,
so maybe it was supposed to
two different things.
It was supposed to flow south at some point, maybe.
Well, contractually, yes, because the State Water Project was built in the 1960s. The Central Valley Project, which is federal, was built starting in the 30s, and that all had to do with like saying, okay, we're going to take this massive amount of water that isn't being used in the Delta, which is coming from the American, the Feather, the Sacramento missing a river. Anyway, it's coming from those big rivers and it's coming into the delta, and there's just too much of it. Nobody's using it. Not as many people are using it. So we're going to do these systems where we pump it into the San Luis Reservoir, and then we're going to put it out in the CVP and in the State Water Project. And all of the contractors, and Kern is the second largest contractor on the State Water Project in the state. Metropolitan Water District in LA is the largest. Wow. They paid for that.
Okay.
They paid for all of that infrastructure to be built.
Which includes probably the California Aqueduct?
Yes.
Is that part of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
The California Aqueduct is the main stem of the State Water Project, but it's also a big stem for the Central Valley Project, which goes over to the east side of our valley through the Bryant-Kern Canal. So that was paid for by these contractors. And then they pay every year, these farmers and these cities. They pay every year for their contracted amount. So they paid to build these systems, and then they pay every year for their contracted amount. And so the contracts are all different. In Kern County, I think we contract for, I'm going to mess this up, but almost like 900,000 acre feet. I want to say we'll just say.
And so what is the controversy that's going on where these contracts were made, these things were built, and now the water's not coming? What is going on with that?
So, well, drought, drought just is what it is. So this year is just an abnormally dry year after another abnormally dry year previous to that. So the water isn't necessarily all there. But here's the thing. We'll just say, I can't remember how much Kern County contracts for. It's escaping my head. We'll just say it's 1 million acre feet a year. I can't remember. But the farmers who pay for those contracts pay for the cost of that 1 million acre feet every year, regardless of whether they get it.
Okay.
Because they have to keep the system going. So that's the idea, is like, okay, well, this money isn't necessarily for a unit of water. It's for the concrete and the power and the upkeep of making sure this system is working correctly. So, and some a bit for the water as well. So what's really bad is they contract for it, they have to pay for the full freight, but they don't get it necessarily. And sometimes that's based on drought, but more and more farmers make this argument a lot, and environmentalists have a different argument. I understand that, but I'm just going to lay it out for you.
Lay it out. That's what we're looking for here.
Without saying, one is right or the other is right, because I'm not smart enough to make that determination. But it was determined that so much water was being pumped south that not enough was going into the delta to keep the delta healthy, not just for fish species. A lot of people want to say, oh, it's fish versus farms, and that's a very, very sort of flat look at this argument. Salt comes in from the ocean because the delta, it goes out into the Bay Area, and if you don't have enough fresh water pushing out, you get salt water coming in, and that contaminates the water that a lot of cities rely on for drinking water. So you need more water being pushed out, to keep that salt at bay. You need more water being pushed out of the different rivers. The valley rivers used to be rife with a lot of native salmon and steelhead and lamprey eel and all that kind of stuff. But when they dammed them up, that had a problem for the native fish. So you need more water to keep those fish, in their regular, 3 years in the ocean and then come back, kind of thing. And so the environmental regulations started to clamp down on how much water could come down in those contracts to various places. And I think they should have just redone the contracts, but they didn't. They still have the contracts. So you still are contracting for the same amount of water.
Well, it sounds like they kind of like unilaterally made some decisions about those contracts.
Yes.
Right. Without offsetting the other side of the other party, right? That's been paying for this, maybe. Right?
Which is, some water lawyers are now, and I just did a story on a lady that came down here in Kern County, gave a talk, and she's like, look, if you're going to take the water, we get it. Farmers and water managers make deals all the time. If you're going to take it, pay for it.
Right.
So there's that argument now, is like, okay, if we're not going to get it. Remember, I told you 2017 was the biggest water year in California history. Everyone should have gotten 100% of their contracts and then some. I mean, there was so much water. The State Water Project contractors only got 85% of their contracted amounts. And that's because of environmental regulations. So the environmentalists can say all they want about, we need the health of the delta and other times. And I don't argue with that. Sure, we don't want to poop in the bed kind of thing.
Yeah.
We all care about the environment. But in a year like that, and they still couldn't get 100% of their contracts.
That doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah, something is a little off kilter there. So I think there's an argument. There should be a way for that to be kind of worked out.
So you also mentioned this struggle to bank the water. So what does banking the water mean? Is it just purely percolation into the ground using big lake beds and areas to flood? What is that?
Yeah, it's so funny. I get asked that a lot. What is a groundwater bank? My mom she came down. She's like, can you drive me by one of these? I want to see this groundwater bank. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's just, the valley in most areas, some areas has hard pan, so you have to be a little careful, but especially around Kern County, because the Kern River just came out of the Kern River Canyon like a fire hose at some points. So it went way south and then it went directly west. And so it created all these wonderful gravelly, loamy kind of soils. So our soil in Kern County is really, really great for percolating water into. So, and in fact, Kern County is the water banking mecca of California, which probably means the world, because California pretty much leads the world in so many things. So Kern County is number one in the world.
Maybe they should be sending that water down more often, right? I'm
going out on a limb and saying Kern County is the number one groundwater banking place in the world. So really what they do is they just basically, sort of scoop out a little bit of dirt and put up a levee or berm around it. And when you get extra water, you just pump that sucker in there and it sinks down. The Kern Water Bank is right out here on the sort of like Enos Lane, heading west. And it's massive. It's hundreds of square miles. And that's what it does. That's what it is. My mom was so disappointed. It's like, you're looking at a groundwater bank. There it is.
And so really we have the storage facilities here in the southern part of the valley. The problem is maybe in a 2017 year is that we just never got the water to bank it, right? It's like a combination of the water didn't get transported where the banks were because
in 2017, we didn't get the water from the State Water Project, but we were getting water out of the Kern River, and then the Kings and Kaweah and Tule rivers. Those guys up north couldn't handle their water that was coming out of that, and they didn't want it to go to the state, so they sent it down here to Kern County. And in actuality, because there's been so much groundwater banking construction here, we didn't lose a single drop of local river water.
Okay.
We were able to store it. It's just, remember I explained that we're used to, we built our system based on the idea that we were going to get this snow, in certain months of the year, and it was going to, very slowly evaporate on our schedule, blah, blah. Well, now we're getting it in these massive deluges, and our reservoirs are too small to hold it, and our conveyance, that's a fancy word for canal, by the way. I don't know why people don't use the word canal. Now I'm starting to do it. Anyway, our canals have sunk and they don't have the capacity to move as much water as they used to. So a lot of environmentalists and regulators sort of wag their fingers at folks in the valley and say, well, no dams for you. You should be doing groundwater banking. And I have to look at them and say, well, but you got to be able to hold the water when it comes, because we have climate change. So we need a reservoir to hold that much water. And then we need to build more canals to be able to move this water, because even if you have every square inch that can be made into groundwater banks, even if we had that all done in every county, from Madera on down, it's not going to work if you can't hold on to that water and move it in an orderly fashion, because each water bank has a percolation rate. Not all the same. You can't just, it doesn't go on your schedule. It goes on its schedule. So anyway.
So then in 2014, State of California rolls out Sigma, which at first glance, it sounds like now Sacramento is getting involved in this. But after hearing this, you lay out the last 100 years, it sounds like this is just the next.
This is the latest.
This is the latest iteration of something that's been going on forever. But this is specifically related to groundwater. Is this their first foray? Is this the first bit of regulation into not just this concept of surface water, moving it around, banking it, and things like that, but actually controlling what is underground and what is taken out of the ground and where does that water go? Is this the first kind of governmental regulative foray into that?
In California, yes. We're the last Western state. Of course, Eastern states don't have to worry about this, but we're the last Western state to have a groundwater law. And this actually, in the terrible, terrible drought of 1976-77, then Governor Brown was urged to come up with some sort of a groundwater law, but he said, this is going to be way too messy. I don't want to get involved. See you later. So he didn't do it. So flash forward to 2014, and you started to have towns that are relying on groundwater, like Porterville, go dry, because 2014 was a terrible drought, and then 2015 was the worst of the worst drought. In fact, I wrote a story about the Kern River had never run that dry, and I said, and in fact, this is proved by tree rings, that the Kern River had not run that dry since Jesus walked the earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yes. It was that dry in 2015. Okay. And it was my favorite lead.
That puts it in perspective.
Yeah. It was my favorite lead ever, because I was like, all right, this is going to get some attention. And then I got marked down on my evaluation, but we'll come. I'm not bitter. Anyway, so yes, this is the state's first attempt to try and regulate groundwater. And they tried to do it by not saying, we, the state, are going to come in and tell you, Kern County, how to regulate your groundwater. We're going to require you to regulate your groundwater under certain parameters. And basically they're not saying you have to regulate it to some level. They're not going to set the level. They're just telling you, look, These are things you have to avoid in your regulation, in your monitoring, and how you use your groundwater. You can't have chronic lowering of the aquifer. You can't have subsidence, just runaway subsidence. That means the land is sinking because you've pumped out so much water, which is why our canals are sinking. You can't suck out the groundwater to the point that what's left is contaminated. So you can't increase contamination. There's 6. I'm going to forget them all. You can't suck out water beneath, a river to the point that you're affecting you're actually pulling the surface water from the river out. That's an interconnected water thing. And there's 2 more, and I can't remember them all of a sudden.
Has it worked? Has this sort of attempt at write your own guidelines and we'll approve it? Has this process worked?
Well, they have until 2040.
Oh, okay.
To get this thing going. And the ultimate goal is to create a sustainable or bring your aquifer into balance. Now, what that means, like I said, it's a little bit mushy because, if I'm a big farmer with, really deep wells, the aquifer could be in balance at 300 feet below the ground level. If I'm a homeowner right next door with a well, that's going to be 150 feet for me. So obviously it kind of depends on your perspective of who you are and what you're looking for in terms of balance.
So is there an argument about, well, we've banked it, so we've taken the efforts to build the water bank that's necessary to bank it, and now we're pumping out our own water, whatever water bank this would be saying this. And then is Sigma preventing them from pumping their own water that they work to bank? Are those kind of conflicts coming up? Or
oh my God, yeah.
Yeah,
that's nothing but conflicts.
Yeah.
And groundwater banking, although a lot of people think it's going to be kind of the savior, you've hit upon the issue that I've been talking to people about. I'm like, well, groundwater, when you put it down below my house, it doesn't stay below my house. Maybe it goes over to Scott's house. It migrates. Yeah. Who knows? Whatever. Maybe Scott has a giant, sucking machine over there that's pulling my
sucking
groundwater.
out all of Lois's water out from under her.
Like I drink your
her
milkshake.
House is sinking. Right.
I drink your milkshake.
I read somewhere is it Corcoran or somewhere has sunk like 30 feet, I guess,
Corcoran.
over the last
that was my story.
100 years. That was where I read it.
That was my story.
That's wild to think that. So the canals actually are off level or off their original grade that they were built at, sometimes due to ground sink is what I'm hearing you say. Yeah.
The Friant Kern Canal has sunk 30 feet in a 33 mile length in the middle.
Yeah.
It has sunk. So it was built in the 30s on it runs on gravity. None of these canals, they couldn't have possibly afford to run on being pumped.
Sure.
So it's all gravity. In 150, I think the Friant Kern Canal is 152 miles long, and this 33 mile section has sunk because people have been over pumping and the ground has collapsed beneath it. So they're having to rebuild it right now, right as we speak.
That is wild. So specifically locally here, Kern River is front and center on our minds, both as a thing of beauty through our city, right? A thing of
could be,
of
I
useful.
Suppose.
It could be. Our riverbed is really beautiful when
I love that
there's
sand.
no water in it.
That's fabulous.
But also a resource for one of the biggest industries we have here, agriculture.
$8 billion industry.
And then how many hundreds of thousands of people also need drinking water, commercial, residential, industrial uses. So maybe give us the overview on what's going on with the Kern River. And specifically, there are some water rights that are still being argued over, right? That freed up a few years ago, but still are unresolved. So maybe you can kind of just lay that out for us a little bit.
Oh boy, let's see. It's triggering my PTSD. Okay, so the Kern River, yes, is one of the most. It is a very hard-working river and has been fought over tooth and nail since 1880. That's one of my leads. Also, is Kern River making lawyers rich since 1880.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so yeah, in 2007 there was a judgment. It was a 10-year long case, and it was between North Kern Water Storage District and Kern Delta Water Storage District. Both have rights to the river. And they went to suing each other. And then in 2007, a judge in Tulare County, because they can never hear them in the same county, they have to do a change of venue. Anyway, he said, Kern Delta had not been using all of its river rights, and it's a use it or lose it state. You have to show that you've been using the water, and you have to use it in a beneficial manner, or you could be subject to losing it if somebody wanted to sue. So North Kern sued. The judge said, they haven't been using all their water, so they're going to forfeit a certain amount. Now, he did not say how much that Kern Delta had to forfeit, and he didn't say who should get it.
Oh, great.
So he said, but
I'm sure that went well.
Yeah. So in California, though, that is the jurisdiction of the State Water Resources Control Board. They dole out all the water permits, except for, just to make this super confusing, any water rights that were perfected prior to 1914.
Oh, okay.
So when you hear people say, well, my water's pre-1914, that means the state can't touch it. The state doesn't regulate it. Just to throw that out.
This forfeiture, which side does this forfeiture fall on? Because it was a part of that original 1880 contract, it actually falls on the pre-1914 rules. It goes by that rule book.
So it was pre-1914 water, but once this sort of opened up into this century, then it comes under, once the judge says, yeah, you haven't been using it, so it's forfeit. Now it comes under state control.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the state, so that was in 2007. It goes to the state mulls it over, and they get really mad at me up there because I say that they work at a glacial pace. But, I mean,
yeah,
come on.
I would agree.
2007, this goes to the state, and then all of these different entities, because that's loose water.
We're
right?
15 years later, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So children have gone to college and, gotten careers in the time that, anyway, once it goes to the state, all of these entities applied for the water, saying, give me the water. No, give me the water. Give me the water. Well, the city of Bakersfield applied for it and said, hey, what we're going to do with the water, if you give it to us, we're going to run it down the riverbed for flora, for fauna, for drinking water, for whatever. All of the other entities, and they're all water districts. I won't bore you with all the names of them, but they would use them for agriculture and municipal uses. So in 2011, the State Water Board decided, okay, you've convinced us that the Kern River is not fully appropriated, because every river since the 1960s in California has been fully appropriated, meaning you can't apply for any more water. We're not going to entertain
It's all
anymore.
used up. It's
done.
like all allocated.
It's all out there. So first they had to determine, is the river fully appropriated? They made that determination in 2011. Okay, no, the river's not fully appropriated. But they did not say how much water was available, when it was available, where it was available, who it should go to. So that question sat from 2011 until 2021 unanswered.
Okay.
And in 2021, they started holding hearings on it. And it's now 2022, and they're still holding hearings.
And that's what's ongoing is how much and when and who gets it, because nobody can be given that water until they know what they're even being given, I imagine, right?
Right. So they still have to determine if there's a volume of water. And by the way, it's not super simple, like, there's 50,000 acre feet, just cut it loose. These rights also involve, when does that water become available? Some of it's, anyway, it just gets really
seasonality, but also then flow rates, right? I mean, is in big years and light years, who has what level of that water, I imagine, comes into play as well, right? Yeah.
Well, let me think. The Kern River is divvied up on flow rate, because the Kern Delta gets the first 300 cubic second feet right out the gate, and then down the road, if there's more, then it's divvied up by second feet. So it's not volume, it's divvied up by second feet. So this is a volume of water that they're looking at. So how that would be divvied up. Anyway.
Yeah, that is a tough problem to solve. So wouldn't flowing it down the river bed, the river that we have here in town, wouldn't that also benefit our groundwater situation? Because there's got to be some percolation on the way down, right? I mean, isn't this...
Sigma has made this much more complicated and much more higher stakes.
Okay.
So they're all still fighting over it currently. And there is sort of a thinking that, going back in a little bit of history, in 2000, the Kern County Water Agency applied for and received $23 million out of Proposition 13, not the taxation one, but it was a water proposition. Mm-hmm. And they got that money specifically because they said, what we're going to do is we're going to build these 5 wells on the north side of the river, and we're going to use those to have water districts run their water down the riverbed. And mostly it's just from Manor to Allen Road, the heart of the city. And then we're going to use those wells and pump it back up into the Cross Valley Canal and send it back to those districts. It's basically a recirculating river for the public. So they got public money to do that, and those wells have never been used for that purpose. So there's a thinking that, look, there's this huge fight over all this water and this river, and the public has kind of gotten in on the sidelines saying, we just want to have a river. Just, it doesn't have to be, we're not going to put steamships on it. We just want to have an ankle deep river, and it would be such a huge amenity for this city. And by the way, there is the public trust, which we can get into if you want to, but that's actually a right that some people are asserting. Well,
let's elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that's really important. And then what's the definition of that? Maybe you can kind of
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to finish my point, it's like
Yeah.
if the entities that control the river wanted to, they could make a deal and make it work based on the existing plumbing that we have to basically do that recirculating river. And I don't know why they aren't going to do that, because once the state gets involved, then things kind of tend to go haywire. And now the public trust issue has come up, and the public trust holds that California, regardless of pre-1914 or what have you, California owns all of the natural resources in this state, from mining to water to fisheries, and they hold that those items in trust for the public. And they allow various entities to use those resources for the highest beneficial use of the public. Now, for most of our history, that's been, water's most beneficially used by farmers for farming. That provides food and provides jobs and provides taxation. So that water is the highest beneficial use of that is for farming, and on down the road from minerals to oil to everything that you can think of. The most beneficial usage usually goes to industry because that provides so many spin-off ancillary benefits to the public. Well, things have changed, and the public trust may find, the state may find that the highest beneficial use of Kern River water under the public trust is for the environment, or for recreation, or for replenishing the groundwater so that people have good quality drinking water. So now, because this has gone into the state, and there's a group of local nonprofits that have hired an attorney, and he's a public trust attorney, now that is being pushed into this whole pile on of who should get this Kern River water. So that's why I say it would be probably more beneficial for people to make a deal locally than allow the state to do it. And sort of off onto the sidelines, there's another public trust entity called Water Audit California that has threatened to sue, separate from the whole shebang.
Locally,
sue the city.
Sue the city for attempting to gain rights to the water.
No, sue the city, because the city owns, in 1976, the city bought its rights to the Kern River from Tenneco West. And in that purchase, it bought all the weirs, the valves, the canal head gates, the property, the actual property of the river and the site of the river. The city owns all that. And even though all of these other entities have rights to the water, the city's the one turning the valves. They have to come to the city and say, hey, we want water for, in X canal for how long, and the city does that. So this Water Audit California is saying the city has an obligation to consider the public trust in all of its operations. So even though it doesn't own that water and it has these contractual obligations, it has to do a study that looks at the public trust and whether the public trust is being best served by how it's been operating the river. And of course, a dry river, and of course, Water Audit hasn't said this in their lawsuit or their threats of lawsuits, but a dry riverbed for miles is not probably the best and most beneficial use.
Yeah, doesn't sound like they're using the water.
So I just foresee this being like, oh, can't you guys just make a deal and make everybody a little happy? No,
well, yeah, I can't tell if this effort at the public trust, this kind of doctrine that was already written in, if I'm understanding correctly, this has been around forever. It's part
of the California Constitution.
Yeah, so it's been around forever, and now it's just sort of being reinterpreted. But I can't tell, is it being reinterpreted in a way that would be beneficial locally, or is it being interpreted some way that, I don't know, our water gets picked up and taken from us or something? Once
the state Water Resources Control Board gets that in their teeth, I don't know what the outcome or the answer to your question is.
Yeah. Well,
and nobody does.
Full control. So there is this concern, and maybe it's already going on. Do we have water that's going from this valley to Los Angeles that we wish we didn't, or would love to sort of claw back on that? Is that through leases, or have we've sold rights to LA entities to take that water?
It's an interesting mix. I've done stories on some local agricultural water agencies that have sold water, but not the rights to it, just the amounts. But they've sold them to, and I can remember doing this in 2015, and I'm like, this just seems ridiculous. You're telling me that you can end that contract, it's long-term contracts to Coachella and various other places for housing developments. Mm-hmm. How do you sell water for 50 years to a housing development? Does that housing development cease to exist after 50 years?
Right.
And I'm going to guess if you try and take that water back, that there's probably going to be some sort of
imminent domain. Now we have to have this water.
You can't do that to people.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, that was Roselle Rio Bravo that did that. And I at the time years ago when I was asking them about it, they were like, oh no, it's a great deal because we get all this money and then we can take this money and sort of develop other water sources. And so we're really actually becoming resilient. And I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And now, flash forward, they're like, we wouldn't make that deal now.
Really?
Yeah. Would not make that deal now. So interesting.
Yeah, it has. So do you get the impression that the groundwater table in general, I hear about all these ag wells and all wells just going deeper. And I don't know if that's a defensive move because everybody's kind of seeing the writing on the wall that they need to be deeper to get the water they need. Or is it that the water table is actually dropping, and is that drop drought related, or does it have a lot to do with the water rights limbo that we're in a lot of these things?
Both. Yeah. So right after Sigma was passed, you saw a huge surge in well construction. Huge. And of course, since there's a drought, people are going to have to drop a bunch of new wells anyway because some of their wells are going dry. So it's sort of half and half, sort of a preemptive thing and also a reactive thing to the drought. And also at the same time as the drought is just restricting the amount of water that we have coming down, that we can replenish our aquifers with it, the regulatory issues have reduced the amount of water that we can get. Remember, I told you in 2017, again, only 85% of our country. Ridiculous. There's also something that happened starting in 2006. There was a federal decision that affected what's known as, I hate to do this to you guys. Sorry for going in the weeds, but there's this.
No, let's go in the weeds. That's what we want.
There's this thing called Article 21 water.
All right, lay it on us.
In the state,
what is it?
In the state, it's Article 21. In the federal system, it's 215 water. Just to make everything super confusing for everybody.
Yeah. Can't be straightforward.
They can't just say excess water.
Right.
But anyway, so that used to be excess water that you could buy. Like, say your contract was for 100 acre feet a year, and you paid $100 an acre foot for water, and okay, you got your 100 acre feet, and then, we had excess water in the system because it was a good year. You could buy under Article 21 of your contract, that's why it's called Article 21 water, or 215, you could buy some extra water from either of those systems for, say, $5 an acre foot. So, of course, people down here, especially with the water banks, the Kern Water Bank was one of the biggest buyers of Article 21 water. So we were, they were like little squirrels, just, hoarding these excess nuts at a cheap level. So, you had way more surface water coming down just as part of our contracts because we were getting as much of our contracts as we could get. And then people were able to buy Article 21 and 215 water. And then in 2006, there was a decision, in the federal courts, I think it was Judge Wanger, that said basically, if the environment is suffering in the Delta, there is no such thing as, you can't have Article 21 water. That water has to go to the environment. So our surface water has been cut under our regular contracts, and then this excess water is basically non-existent anymore. So then on top of that, we have drought. So yeah, our water table is, if you look at hydrographic cross sections and stuff, it's on a trajectory that's going down with little blips for 2017 or 2006 or 2020, the nicer years.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to figure out, are we just on like a train that's just kind of destined to fall off this cliff where there just isn't the groundwater that we need? Or does a few wet years get us back in the game? Or does some of this regulation get resolved and then we're back in the game? What needs to happen for the future 5-10 years down the road to be full of water for us locally?
Well, we're not going to be full of water again, I don't think, because I do not see anything reversing the trend in Sacramento in terms of the regulatory attitude towards water in the Delta. So I just see that continuing to either wither or basically go, sort of stagnate at that lower level, that 80, I can't stress it enough. 2017 is just shocking when you
Well, that kind of showed what
85% of
is
contract.
possible is even in a year, even in an extreme year, still not getting the water. It does kind of show the hand of the other side of that contract.
So anybody that thinks, we're going to get more water out of the Delta if only someone will listen, that door is closed, locked, vault, Maxwell, get smart.
That's kind of leading to what I wanted to ask you is, in all of this, do you get the impression that there are some actors and some parts of this negotiation that are really negotiating from a very, very sincere place, and then there are some that are really negotiating from let's slow this down, stop up the works.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not get this resolved. And is it because you described this really spaghetti mess of a complicated problem? Like, this is not an easy problem to solve. There's no doubt about that, right? But it seems that it could be solved if everybody was acting in a way that was working to solve it. It sounds like there are some parties involved that actually don't want it resolved, or just aren't working towards a resolution as much as they are an ideology or an agenda. Right, exactly. Do you get that impression?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's some really, really reasonable environmental groups that recognize that, hey, I eat, my kids eat, I want farming to continue. And people listening to this will probably roll their eyes over. Environmental Defense Fund is one of them. And, they've been coming forward and saying, hey, how can we help? What can we do? They're the ones that put forward, like, under SGMA. And by the way, I don't know if everybody understands the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. We're going to have to retire to get to the goals of that 2040 sustainable balanced aquifer, whatever that is. We're going to have to retire 1 million acres that are currently in production right now in farming throughout the Central Valley or the San Joaquin Valley.
What is the timeline on that?
40 years, 2040. So now it's not 40 years. It's 18 years.
18 years from now. Okay.
18 years from now. I mean, think about it. And in Kern County, it's 1/3 of our acreage.
Wow.
We farm 900,000 acres in Kern County, and we're going to have to lose 1/3 of that to come to grips with SGMA. 1/3 of it. I mean, think what that's going to do to the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you saw the newspaper today, we had $8 billion in ag sales last year. $8 billion. Yeah. Now imagine if 1/3 of that is gone. Okay, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? How are things going to change? How are people going to make a living? And what's going to happen to all this land?
Yeah.
So Environmental Defense Fund saw this happening and said, a couple of years ago, we need to come up with the state. If the state's going to mandate this, and this kind of goes back to what we said at the very beginning of our conversation, you want it, you buy it.
Right.
I mean, these are property rights. So
there's a financial offset that should happen if this is what you want.
If the state wants my house to run high-speed rail through, the state has to buy my house, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
If the state doesn't want me to use water, and water is a property right, I could sink a well on my property, and I have the right to use that water. It is a property right. Not so many minerals, because in Kern County, you give all those, that's all owned by Chevron. But anyway, a small aside.
So part of this, we were talking about SGMA. So part of SGMA is that you need to come in to the proposed guidelines and become part of the system that SGMA has laid out, I guess, right?
Right.
And has everybody come under that yet, or is that still ongoing as well?
No. Oh my God, the whole SGMA thing. In fact, I'm about to write a story about how the Tulare Lake Subbasin, which covers Kings County, has just been found inadequate by the state. Their plan. Nope. Sorry. Not. And it's not even a go back to the drawing board. It's like, you've been given 2 tries. This is crap, and we're going to take you to possibly be under probation, which means the state could come in and actually set pumping limits. And I mean, so getting back to your point of like good actors and bad actors, there are some people who are looking at this down the road and saying, I'm going to get what I can get and get it now. And you're seeing people just pumping a crap ton of water in some areas, and selling off surface water to various entities, mostly farming entities. Everybody thinks that everybody's selling their water to LA, and that's not really what's happening.
Well, that's why I asked that question, is that I'm trying to cut through like the misconceptions, preconceptions, the things that are great headlines or talking points that aren't completely true. And what are the real issues, and that's why I ask, is a lot of water going to LA, and is that something on our radar that we should be concerned about? There's
a lot of water going to LA that they banked here.
Okay.
They MWD and the Irvine Ranch own a bunch of. Irvine Ranch owns a lot of land right around the Kern River. They've been banking it, and they own land up in Kings County, and they've been banking it. So to us, and by that, their water that they're banking, they're buying it by contract under the state water project, and they're bringing it down from the Delta, and they're banking it. It's not like they're just
And like so they're one of these water. Paying players in the system that has paid their dues to own that water. It isn't as though they somehow it just landed in their lap, or that they played games to get that. They contracted.
Yeah, they have a contract. You can look it up. It's all public.
Sure.
You know how much they can get and how much they do get. Okay. You can look that up. So now. Are they buying water elsewhere? Is there groundwater being sold? I mean, it's kind of hard to track because there's a lot of pipelines out there. In the canals, somebody usually is involved in monitoring those canals and how much water is moving and who's moving it. And those are usually public agencies. So you can find out how much water is moving and where it's going. if it's in canals. If it's in pipelines, it's a little different story. So when I say we're not, LA's not sucking up all our water, it's, for the most part.
Yeah, there could be a little bit unaccounted for.
Yeah, there's always something on the sly. Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, good actors and bad actors. There are some of those, and we'll see if they get weeded out by the Sigma process. It's just hard to say.
So tell me a little bit about Bring Back Kern org. I think you're involved in that, I guess, or at least that's another voice. You're not involved.
I cover them.
Okay, maybe that's what I got the impression. But they're a voice that's getting louder and louder locally, promoting the Kern River running through town. Right. I mean, to summarize that, have they made progress on that? Is that something that's moving in the right direction?
That depends on, your version of progress. I mean, they've been a thorn in the side of a number of water agencies. I could tell you that.
Okay, well, maybe that's getting people to talk or wake up to the issue a little bit.
I've got no problem with it. I mean, this is a group of young people. And by young, I mean like 30, 35. That's all young to me.
Yeah.
And some of them grew up in Bakersfield and some of them, landed here for jobs. And they're like, why are we accepting that this Kern River is dry like this? And so they have been pushing, and they've been doing a lot of different awareness campaigns, and they've been going up to the State Water Board and appearing before the State Water Board. And they were the ones that got this coalition of local groups together and, pooled their money and hired an attorney to push the public trust issues.
Okay.
So they've latched onto the idea of the public trust, and they are pushing the public trust issues. They're going to be putting on a webinar. I just had it on my site about another creek, because they would like to see a compromise. They're pushing something that could end up really blowing up the rights structure on the river, but they would rather see a compromise that results in water in the Kern River, but not take away water from agriculture to a super detrimental point.
Yeah, does what they're proposing sound like a compromise that would be one of those kind of, this kind of fits everybody's needs as good as possible, like a good compromise on all ends?
Well, it sounds like it to me, but I'm not a farmer who gets water from, it all depends on
So it could be taking money from ag to put it other places.
But, some of the kids that are involved in Bring Back the Kern work in ag. And so they know the value of ag, and they don't think that ag is some, greedy, faceless, horrible thing like a lot of environmentalists think. They would like to see a compromise happen locally. And, anyway, so the webinar they have coming up is about the Puta Creek, which is up in the Davis area. And same thing, one creek, just a little bit of water, a lot of demands, a lot of lawyers involved. And they came to a compromise and an agreement. So these Bring Back the Kern folks are like, hey, come tell us how you did it. Everybody gives up a little. Does somebody give up a lot? What's the formula for finding some sort of compromise success?
That's a good approach. It's worked for these guys. Let's see what they did is kind of the tone of the webinar, right? And let's see how far we could take this in the same direction.
And that webinar is happening October 20th. It's on my website.
Okay, fantastic. We'll check that out. Before we wrap, maybe you can let us know, maybe just in the near term, the next 12 months. I mean, we're getting ready for, winter season. So hopefully we're going to get some snowpack and some rain. I mean, I don't know. But what should we be looking for? Even aside from that, just regulation-wise, what is coming down the pike? No pun intended. In the next 12 months.
In the next 12 months, all of the meteorologists, and I just, boo hiss on them, they're saying we're in for another La Nina, which means usually, so La Nina and El Nino. El Nino is usually associated with a big wet year, and La Nina is, much more stingy with her precipitation. However, I've seen them in reverse, so who knows?
Yeah.
But they're saying another La Nina at least through November. They can't really predict beyond that into December. So who knows? Hopefully we'll see a reversal and we'll get some precipitation. California, of course, being California, will be like, oh, it rained. We don't have a drought anymore. We don't have to worry about it. Right. Yay, everybody fill up their swimming pools, which I think is unfortunate. I think that I would really like to see some regulation statewide all the way down to the cities that said, you know what? We shouldn't call ourselves drought prone. We shouldn't even say it's a drought. We live in a dry state and we should live like it. We shouldn't have grassy medians. We should, just everywhere we can cut. We should live like within our means. Like
change that mindset.
Right.
To
our checkbook isn't as big as we thought it was.
Yeah.
So let's cut back to what our checkbook realistically is and see what we, what's a must have and what's a, want to have, and then, live within those means. I would love to see that. I don't think we're ever going to. But I see the State Water Resources Control Board. This is going to be an ongoing thing. They are looking at the rights structure in California. Remember I told you pre-1914, not touchable by the state. I think they want to to upend all of that.
Really?
Yeah.
And just
that's not going to happen in the next 12 months, but that's just something to watch, the things that they're doing to try and measure the amount of pre-1914 rights water that's being used and is available. Well, if you can't measure it, you can't regulate it. So the first thing they want to do is measure it. So what comes next, my friend?
I cringe when I hear that, because what that means in my mind is not just they want to rewrite the whole thing the most fair way possible. In my mind, I'm hearing they want to rewrite the whole thing based on whatever lobbyist has their ear at the time, or whatever money's flowing, whatever direction in the political scene, unfortunately. And who knows what that is, right? That's what could be scary about that.
Like I keep saying, especially like on this Kern River thing, once the state gets it in its teeth, you don't know where it's going. Yeah. It's always better to come up with a mutually agreeable deal.
Yeah, a little compromise isn't so bad if you maintain control of that compromise, right?
And you look at the state and you go, hey, everything's great here. We're all happy with each other.
Yeah, go talk to those other guys.
Go talk to them. Those people on the Kings River, they don't know what they're doing.
They got real problems up there. We're fine down here. Lois, how will people get a hold of you after the show, or check out your website and all the media that you're doing on this important topic?
sjvwater.org is the website. My email is lois.henry@sjvwater.org.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for listening to my nerdy water stuff.
I love it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hanson Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, Dave Plivlich, President and CEO of the Marcom Group and MarcomBranding.com, and Amanda DiGiacomo, President of Atlas Financial Solutions. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.